Hannah Brown, and let me tell you a story. My story. It doesn't begin with fireworks or a dramatic betrayal in the dead of night. No, it starts in the most ordinary way. A text message while signing my son out of daycare. 4 words that cracked the foundation of my life. Moving to Spain, good luck. That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just a digital shrug from the man I once trusted with everything. 8 years of marriage gone in the span of a push notification. In that moment, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I smiled at my son, handed him his favorite dinosaur snack, and walked us both to the car like nothing had changed. But everything had. I was no longer a wife. I was a woman left behind with a 4-year-old and $347.00 to her name. And yet, as terrifying as that was, it wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It was the lie, the one my husband told his mother, the one she repeated to everyone who would listen, that I was keeping our son from him out of spite, that I was unstable, that I was dangerous. That's where this story really begins. Not with abandonment, but with the war that came after. And if you're still reading, buckle up. Because I didn't just survive it. I turned the whole damn thing upside down. It doesn't begin with fireworks or a dramatic betrayal in the dead of night. No, it starts in the most ordinary way, a text message while signing my son out of daycare. 4 words that cracked the foundation of my life. Moving to Spain. Good luck. The pen slipped from my fingers mid-signature. I blinked at the screen, hoping it was a cruel joke or a wrong number, but there was no mistake. The message came from Brandon, my husband, the father of my son, and attached, like a brutal punchline, was a screenshot, a $0 balance from our joint savings account. "Mommy, did you bring my dinosaur snacks today?" Noah tugged at my coat sleeve, his bright eyes full of innocent expectation. I smiled. Barely. My lips moved on instinct. "Of course. I did, sweetheart." I handed him the crackers with trembling fingers, then finished signing him out like nothing had changed. But everything had. On the drive home, Noah hummed quietly in the back seat, singing the theme song of his favorite cartoon. Meanwhile, my brain ran numbers, timelines, memories. We had $42,731.00 in savings, meticulously built over the past 8 years. Rent was due in 3 days, my freelance checks wouldn't hit for another 2 weeks, and now there was nothing. Brandon didn't call, he didn't explain, he simply disappeared with a woman half his age and a bank account full of money we once called ours. And I hadn't even seen it coming. That night after Noah fell asleep in his pajamas with little green T-Rexes on them, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. My inbox was empty. No follow-up, no apology, just the echo of that message. Moving to Spain, good luck. The kind of cruelty that's not loud or violent, but precise, strategic. I opened our checking account. $347.12. My stomach twisted. I clicked again just to be sure. Same number. Same gut punch. Then, as if summoned by the universe's cruel timing, my phone rang. Virginia Brown, my mother-in-law. "Suzanne, what have you done?" Her voice pierced the quiet like a blade. "It's Hannah," I replied, already exhausted. "Don't play games. Brandon says you're refusing to let him speak to Noah. What kind of mother uses her child like a bargaining chip?" I gripped the edge of the counter. "Virginia, he left. He took everything. He's in Spain with Jackie." "Don't you dare lie to me," she snapped. "He showed me the messages. You're demanding more alimony or you'll cut off contact." The room began to spin. "What messages?" "Oh, please," she said, cold and certain. "You're not fooling anyone. I raised a good man. You're just bitter he's finally happy." She hung up before I could defend myself, before I could ask the question clawing at my throat. What messages? That's when I realized Brandon wasn't just leaving. He was rewriting the story, casting himself as the victim, and me, the unhinged wife, standing in the way of fatherhood. That night, after washing the dishes in a trance and double-checking that the front door was locked 3 times, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I opened a blank email. Subject: divorce attorney. Urgent body, I need help. My husband took everything. Then I stared at the blinking cursor for what felt like hours. The word everything didn't even begin to cover it. The next morning, after dropping Noah off at preschool, I drove to the nearest branch of our bank. I didn't even remember putting on shoes. My body moved on autopilot. The bank manager, a woman named Carla, who used to call me Mrs. Brown with a smile, now avoided eye contact as she reviewed my request. "I'm sorry, Ms. Brown," she said gently, "but since both names were on the joint account, Mr. Brown had legal access to transfer the funds." "All of them?" I asked. "He didn't even leave $50. She offered a mechanical nod. The withdrawal was made online, and the account was closed immediately after. "And there's nothing you can do?" Her sympathetic expression never quite reached her eyes. "I'm afraid not." I stepped outside into the frigid Chicago air, realizing I had no plan, no backup. My entire adult life had been built around this man. We made decisions together, or so I thought. Vacations, investments, even the choice for me to step back from full-time editing to raise Noah. Brandon had said, "Don't worry, I've got us." Turns out he meant himself. I pulled out my phone and opened the text again. "Moving to Spain. Good luck." I couldn't decide which part hurt more, the betrayal or the smug punctuation at the end, a period, not a question. Not an ellipsis, just an ending. By the time I returned home, there was a stack of envelopes shoved through the mail slot. One of them was thicker than the rest, certified, with an embossed return address from a law firm I didn't recognize. I didn't open it right away. I fed Noah dinner first. Mac and cheese, cut into small bites. I read him his favorite dinosaur book, twice, and tucked him in with the same lullaby I used to hum when he was a baby. Then I sat on the couch, took a breath, and slit the envelope open with a butter knife. Inside, a neatly stapled divorce petition. Filed a week earlier. I flipped through the pages, each one colder than the last. Irreconcilable differences. Full custody to the mother. No visitation quested. No child or spousal support to be provided. My eyes blurred halfway through. And then I saw it, an addendum, a handwritten note on firm letterhead, signed by Brandon's attorney. Mr. Brown has indicated that Ms. Brown possesses sufficient personal savings to care for the child without financial assistance. As such, no support will be offered. I dropped the papers onto the floor. My hands trembled, but not from sadness this time, from rage, from clarity. This wasn't an impulsive decision. Brandon had been planning his exit for weeks, maybe months, while I was packing school lunches and scheduling Noah's speech therapy sessions. He was building his escape route. And now he wanted to disappear quietly, leave me to pick up the pieces and still control the narrative? Not a chance. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. I typed everything I could remember. Every strange behavior, every suspicious receipt, every excuse about working late. I copied the bank transactions, saved screenshots of the text message, and started a new folder labeled Legal War. This wasn't just abandonment, it was premeditated erasure. Oh, I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My thoughts kept cycling back to Virginia's voice on the phone, Brandon's lies, and the strange confidence in his message, as if he truly believed I'd fold, that I'd accept the humiliation quietly. But then I remembered who I used to be, before the marriage, before the diapers and daycare bills. I was sharp. I was relentless. I didn't cry in corners. I dug deeper. I fought back. At 3 a.m, I poured a glass of wine I couldn't afford and stood in front of the kitchen window. The city lights shimmered across the skyline, indifferent to my chaos. And somewhere out there, Brandon was sipping champagne with Jackie, believing he had won. But he had forgotten one thing. I was never the one who broke. And then, just as I turned off the kitchen light, the doorbell rang. A courier stood on the porch, holding another envelope. "Urgent legal delivery for Hannah Brown," he said. Inside was a second document, a copy of an internal HR complaint, sent to Brandon's employer overseas. The sender, listed as me, but I hadn't sent anything. Someone was impersonating me and trying to destroy my credibility before I even got to court. The first lie wasn't his disappearance, it was the email I never sent. The complaint to Brandon's employer was detailed, venomous, and signed with my name. It accused him of abandoning his child, evading financial obligations, and included personal information that only someone close, very close, would know. I stared at it, pulse pounding. I hadn't written it. I hadn't even known where he was working. But someone had. Someone had written that email, submitted it using a fake account, and ensured it reached human resources just in time to sabotage his new job in Spain. The courier didn't wait for a signature, just handed me the envelope and disappeared into the cold morning. I stood on the front step for a moment, clutching the papers, my mind spinning. The email was fake, but the damage it caused would be very real. I forwarded the document to Vivian Hale. We hadn't officially retained her yet, but she'd agreed to review the situation. When I called her office later that morning, I didn't expect her to answer personally. "Hannah," she said, calm and direct, "I've read the documents. Do you have a few minutes?" I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open, coffee gone cold. "It wasn't me, I swear." "I believe you," she replied immediately. "But someone's trying to establish a pattern here. They're painting you as unstable, vindictive, emotionally erratic. First, the messages to Brandon's mother. Now this email." My stomach clenched. "But those messages? He told her I threatened him. I never did. Do you have proof?" I paused. "I never wrote them. They don't exist on my phone." "Then we need to prove they were fabricated," Vivian said. "Let's start there. And I need everything you have. Bank records, text messages, screenshots, any emails you did send, even drafts." "Drafts?" "Yes," she said. "Sometimes people take content from drafts you never send. If someone had access to your devices, it could have been copied and weaponized." I froze. My mind flashed back to the night Virginia came over, uninvited under the pretense of helping with Noah. She brought soup, told me to rest while she watched cartoons with him. I was exhausted, half sick, and had left my laptop open on the dining table while I dozed off on the couch. She'd had hours. "She was here," I whispered. "Virginia." The night after Brendan left, I fell asleep. The laptop was out. Vivian's tone hardened. "That's where we begin, then." Later that day, as Noah napped, I retrieved my old external drive from the back of the closet. It hadn't been used in months, but I remembered backing up some of Brandon's files. There, back when he couldn't find space on his cloud account. The folders were still there. Travel photos, resumes, budget spreadsheets, and one labeled Spain plan. "Do not me meant," I clicked. Inside were flight itineraries, apartment rental agreements, even a scanned letter addressed to Ms. Jackie Monroe from a relocation firm in Barcelona. The date? 6 weeks ago. While Brandon was still telling me we were tight on cash. But what made my blood run cold was a Word document titled Custody Strategy. I opened it slowly, as if touching something contaminated. Phase 1. Establish mental instability through historic postpartum documentation. Phase 2. Create digital footprint suggesting hostility, refusal of co-parenting. Phase 3. Remove financial liability by assigning full custody to mother. Phase 4. Petition for custody transfer once residency is established in Spain. I couldn't breathe. He had mapped it all out, like a business plan. Like a marketing campaign, our marriage, our son, my mental health, it was all just leverage. I wanted to scream. Instead, I saved everything, created duplicates, uploaded copies to encrypted drives. Then I called. Vivian again, she answered after one ring. Talk to me. I found the file. I said, he was going to use my postpartum records. He was going to erase me. A long pause. Then, we have enough to begin. Tomorrow morning, my office, 9 a.m. I nodded, as if she could see me. Okay. And Hannah? Yeah. This is war now? The next morning, I stepped into Vivian Hale's office with a flash drive in my coat pocket and a storm in my chest. Her space was modest. No glass skyscraper, no city view corner suite. But it was meticulous, like her. Walls lined with law books, sunlight pouring through a single window, and a kettle already boiling in the corner. The kind of place where facts mattered more than appearances. Coffee or tea? She asked as I sat across from her. Tea? I answered, voice hoarse. Didn't sleep much. She didn't ask why. She knew. I handed her the flash drive. It's all there. Documents, spreadsheets, screenshots, even the custody plan. Vivian slid it into her laptop without a word. Her eyes scanned the screen, sharp and quiet. Then she leaned back, exhaled, and looked at me. This isn't just abandonment, she said. It's a coordinated character assassination. He wanted to leave the country with your son and zero responsibility. And his mother was helping him do it. I nodded. I think she sent the fake email. She had access to my laptop. I even found one of my unsent drafts. Parts of it match what was in the complaint. We'll prove it, she said. But we need more. Motive, pattern, witnesses. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello? Hannah? A hesitant female voice. You don't know me. My name's Bethany Cruz. I used to live with Jackie. Brandon's girlfriend? I stiffened. Vivian sat up straighter. I found your number on a notepad Jackie left behind. Bethany continued. I wasn't sure if I should call, but I think you deserve to know what they've been planning. I pressed the phone to my ear, heart pounding. Tell me everything. Bethany hesitated. Jackie's been talking about this for months. She and Brandon were going to start over in Spain, no baggage. That's what she called you and Noah. Baggage. She said Brandon was moving funds so you couldn't trace them. Offshore accounts, hidden assets. Vivienne scribbled notes silently as I repeated Bethany's words. They weren't just running, Bethany added. They wanted to make it impossible for you to fight back. Jackie even bragged about Brandon drafting false records, finding doctors who'd testify about your mental health. It was twisted. I swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this now? Because I didn't know how far they'd go. And because Jackie told me one more thing before she left. Brandon's friend Trevor knew everything. Trevor, Brandon's best friend, the best man at our wedding. Do you have his number? I'll text it to you, she said. Just be careful. They're more dangerous than you think. I ended the call with a thank you and turned to Vivian. Trevor knows everything. Then he's next. That evening, I called Trevor. He answered on the second ring. Hannah. His voice was tired, hesitant. You knew? Said, no preamble. A pause. Yeah. I knew. You helped him disappear. Helped him hide our money. Our son. I didn't help, he said quickly. I stayed quiet. He made me promise not to get involved. Said he needed space. He took everything, Trevor. He fabricated documents. He's trying to take Noah away from me. Trevor sighed. I didn't know it had gone that far. Look, he mentioned something a while back. An offshore account in the Cayman said his mom helped him set it up for tax purposes years ago. First Caribbean International, I think. Vivian leaned in. I repeated the name. Did he ever mention passwords? Account numbers? No, Trevor said. But you know how Brandon is. He's arrogant. Uses the same passwords for everything. Birthdays, anniversaries. As soon as we hung up, I opened Brandon's old iCloud drive. He never changed the backup email. Tried a few combinations. Our anniversary, Noah's birth date. On the fourth attempt, it opened. Inside were dozens of folders, travel plans, scanned documents, screenshots of wire transfers. One folder was labeled Backups Liechtenstein. Another, Custody, Strategy, Drafts. I didn't read. I saved everything. Vivian took one look and nodded. This is the lever. We're freezing his accounts. But just as I began to breathe again, my phone lit up with a new notification. New message from Brandon. I hear you're dragging my mother into this bad move, Hannah. Drop it, or you'll regret it. His threat was clear, but so was my resolve. If he wanted war, he had picked the wrong woman to underestimate. I didn't send that email, I repeated, staring down the man in the expensive suit across the negotiation table, but I know exactly who did. David Hoffman, Brandon's attorney, didn't flinch. He looked like someone who'd defended CEOs through worse scandals. Mrs. Brown, he said calmly, intent is difficult to prove, but let's not escalate things unnecessarily. I leaned forward, voice steady. You already escalated when your client abandoned his child and emptied our accounts. Vivian sat beside me, her fingers steepled, unreadable as always. We're requesting an immediate freeze of all known assets, including the accounts we've identified in the Caymans and Liechtenstein. Hoffman raised an eyebrow. Alleged accounts. Vivier slid a folder across the table. Inside were screenshots, wire transfers, PDF statements, all pulled from Brandon's own cloud. Not alleged anymore. He glanced over the evidence. For the first time, something flickered behind his cool demeanor, but he recovered quickly. My client will contest any claim of misappropriation. Vivier smiled. Let him. The door opened behind us, and a figure stepped into the room. Virginia Brown. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor, her perfume arriving a full 2 seconds before her voice. This is outrageous, she said, brushing past me as though I were a stranger. My son doesn't deserve this witch hunt. I turned in my seat to face her fully. What he deserves is irrelevant now. This is about Noah. About what you did, she scoffed. What I did, I tried to protect my family. From you. Vivian stood. Mrs. Brown, since you've chosen to be present, I'll inform you that we'll be calling you as a witness, specifically regarding a document recovered from your son's personal files. A thank you card. Virginia's mouth twitched. Vivian opened her briefcase, pulling out a scanned note. My stomach churned just looking at it. Thanks for helping with the Barcelona apartment deposit. We couldn't have done it without you. Love, Brandon. Dated 3 months before the day he vanished. I watched as Virginia scanned the page. Her face paled just slightly. Then she lifted her chin. That proves nothing. Vivian countered. It proves knowledge, intent, material support, and potentially conspiracy to commit custodial interference. Virginia turned to me, her voice colder than the marble beneath her feet. You always played the victim well, Hannah. But deep down, we both know the truth. Brandon outgrew you. That's all this is. I met her gaze. No, this is about a boy you helped his father abandon. You didn't protect your family, Virginia. You destroyed it. The emergency hearing was set the following morning. We stood outside the courtroom as clerks rushed past, phones buzzed, and security scanned every bag like we were smuggling weapons instead of broken dreams. I clutched my folder. So tightly the paper edges cut into my fingers. Vivian reviewed her notes one last time. Focus on the facts, she reminded me. Not your emotions. They'll try to bait you. The doors opened. We filed in. Brandon wasn't there. His counsel would appear on his behalf, but the gallery was fuller than I expected. A few reporters, a distant cousin of Brandon's, and Virginia seated with perfect posture, head held high like a first lady defending a doomed president. The judge entered. Introductions. Sworn statements. Then Vivienne stood and began the presentation. This is not a case of simple divorce or irreconcilable differences, she said, her voice crisp and calm. This is premeditated financial abandonment, character defamation, and custodial manipulation. The evidence before you details a coordinated effort to isolate my client and deprive her child of support, stability, and truth. She submitted the flash drive. Exhibits A through D. My stomach twisted as my private life flashed across the courtroom monitors. Texts, bank statements, travel bookings, and the damning custody strategy document. Virginia looked away. Vivian ended with a direct request: immediate child support, freeze of assets, and preliminary full custody until Brandon appeared in person. Then David Hoffman spoke. He questioned everything: my stability, my memory, even my motivation. When he suggested I might have planted the strategy file to smear Brandon, I almost stood up. But Vivian raised a hand, and the judge wasn't fooled. "I've reviewed the documentation," the judge said, voice firm. "The court grants the petitioner's emergency motions. Full financial disclosures will follow. Custody remains with the mother pending further review. It was a small win, but a critical one, and yet, even as I exhaled in relief, I couldn't shake one thing. Why had Virginia shown up? She wasn't required to. She hadn't even been summoned. She came of her own accord. Which meant something else was coming. That evening, my phone buzzed with a call from an international number. A woman's voice asked, "Is this Hannah Brown? I'm calling from Meridian Global Barcelona about your husband." I stepped onto my balcony, phone pressed to my ear as the wind carried in the sharp bite of late autumn off Lake Michigan. The woman's voice was crisp, formal, tinged with a European accent I couldn't quite place. "This is Lucia Vega," she said. "I'm the HR director at Meridian Global Barcelona." My heart dropped. "Is something wrong?" "We received your email regarding Mr. Brandon Brown's employment and pending custody issues in the United States." I blinked. "My email?" "Yes, it was quite detailed. You expressed concern about his legal fitness for international relocation, particularly with regard to your son. You also threatened litigation against our company if we continued to employ him." I never sent anything like that," I said. "Could you forward it to me?" There was a pause. Then, "Certainly, though I must inform you, Mr. Brown was terminated yesterday as a result of the claims in that message. He failed to disclose the custody dispute, which violates our policy." I thanked her, barely able to form the words, and ended the call. Minutes later, the forwarded email appeared in my inbox. I read it twice, then a third time, disbelief sharpening into fury. It was signed with my name. It used my phrasing, and it quoted exact lines from a draft email I'd started but never sent. Someone had accessed my personal files, twisted my words, and used them to sabotage Brandon's job, knowing it would undercut the very support order we'd just secured. My chest constricted as realization struck. There was only one person who'd had physical access to those files, someone who had visited me right after Brandon left, someone I had let in because I thought she was there to help, Virginia. She hadn't come to comfort me. She'd come to collect ammunition. I called Vivian immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Someone impersonated me," I said, pacing the length of my living room. "They used a draft I'd written, something I never sent. Let me guess. Virginia. She was the only one with access. I was sick. She stayed with Noah while I slept." My laptop. Vivian was silent for a beat. Then, "This is identity fraud and obstruction. We'll file a motion immediately and notify the court. Do not contact her directly. Let me handle it." But I wasn't done. I stormed to the filing cabinet where I had collected every document, every photo, every scrap of evidence. Buried beneath a stack of old warranties, I found the birthday card I had photographed weeks ago, the one Brandon had written to his mother. I stared at it now, rereading the words with fresh understanding. "We couldn't have made this happen without your support." No, we couldn't have. But she had made sure they did. Virginia hadn't just watched Brandon leave. She had financed it, orchestrated it, and now she was sabotaging my ability to hold him accountable. Because if he lost his job, the court couldn't enforce child support. It would look like I was draining him dry. It would tilt the narrative in their favor. Suddenly, the concerned mother-in-law act made sense. She was never here to keep peace. She was here to pull the strings. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't an international number. It was Brandon. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds before answering. "What the hell did you do?" he barked, skipping any form of greeting. "I just got fired. My visa is void. My housing gone. You think this is going to help you in court?" "It wasn't me," I said. "It was your mother." He fell silent. "Check the message," I continued. "Read it closely. Ask yourself who had the access, who had the motive." "You're lying," he said, but his voice faltered. I didn't respond. He hesitated. "Mom would never check your drafts." "Look at the documents," I said evenly. "They were in my apartment, until your mother visited." Brandon cursed under his breath. Then, after a beat, "I'll call you back." He hung up. 10 minutes later, an email appeared in my inbox. No subject line, just a zip file attachment titled, "For You." I opened it. Inside was a screenshot of a text conversation between Brandon and Virginia, and in one of her messages dated 3 months prior were words that turned my spine to ice. "Once you're settled in Spain, we can work on getting full custody of Noah, use Hannah's postpartum history. The court won't risk him with someone unstable." They hadn't just planned to disappear. They had planned to erase me. He walked into the courtroom like he owned it. Creased suit, perfect haircut, that same smug tilt of the chin that once made me fall for him, now it just made my stomach turn. Brandon Brown was back on U.S. soil. He hadn't bothered to notify me or the court of his return. We only found out because Vivian received a ping from airport authorities the moment he landed, thanks to the restraining order we'd quietly filed the day before. The judge had granted it under emergency circumstances, based on the email impersonation and the threat he sent me, "Drop it, or you'll regret it." What he hadn't counted on was that I'd stop being afraid the moment I knew the truth. "You shouldn't have dragged my mother into this," Brandon said lowly as we stood in the hallway, outside the courtroom, waiting to be called in. His eyes flicked to Vivian and then back to me. "Bad move, Hannah. You made the first move," I replied. "She just played her part." His expression flickered for a second, some mix of confusion and calculation, but he covered it quickly. "You want a war? You've got one." Vivian stepped between us. "Mr. Brown, you are within 30 feet of our client. I suggest you step back before violating the temporary order." Brandon took a step away, smirking. "Cute, you got yourself a bulldog in heels." "No," I said evenly, "I got myself an ally, something you've never understood." Inside the courtroom, it was standing room only. Reporters had started to take interest after someone, almost certainly Brandon's camp, leaked select parts of the case online. The headline I saw on Twitter that morning read, "Bitter ex-wife tries to bleed tech exec dry in custody war." It wasn't just false, it was designed. But today we had facts. Vivian opened with poise. She presented the timeline, Brandon's financial abandonment, the staged email sabotage, the coordinated plan to claim I was unfit. Then came the text messages, the custody strategy, the confirmation that his job had been terminated due to misconduct. They'd fabricated. Then came Jackie Monroe's name. "Miss Monroe has provided sworn statements," Vivian said, "and bank records indicating Mr. Brown's second offshore account in Liechtenstein, a location not disclosed in our previous filings." Brandon's lawyer, now a younger, more nervous-looking man named Eric Malden, stood to object, but the judge didn't even look up from the document Vivian had just submitted. "Is it true, Mr. Brown," the judge asked slowly, "that you failed to disclose this second account?" Brandon shifted in his seat. "It wasn't active," he muttered. "It's not relevant." "It's relevant when you claim you're unable to pay child support," Vivian countered smoothly, especially when you use those funds to disappear across international borders with a romantic partner. The room felt heavy, every breath held. But Vivian wasn't done. She turned toward the gallery, then toward the table behind Brandon's attorney. "We'd also like to submit this," she said, holding up a printout. "A statement of financial assistance from Mrs. Virginia Brown confirming she helped fund her son's relocation, in full awareness of his intent to sever financial and custodial obligations." Virginia wasn't in the courtroom this time, but her signature was. Brandon stared at the document like it might combust if he looked hard enough. For once, he was speechless. When the court recessed for a short break, I stepped outside, letting the cold air slap my cheeks awake. The tension of being near him, of watching the man who once kissed my forehead at bedtime try to erase me, was suffocating. I leaned against the stone pillar outside the courthouse, watching people pass without knowing that inside, someone was trying to rewrite the story of who I was, and yet, for the first time in months, I wasn't behind anymore. I was setting the pace. The trap had been laid. And he'd walked right into it. Back inside, as we prepared for the next session, Vivian checked her phone. She turned to me, frowning slightly. "Jackie just sent something new," she said. "She says it's time we saw everything." Jackie's message was short and cryptic. "Check your email. Everything. You'll need it." Vivi and I retreated to a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, laptop open between us, half-drunk coffee forgotten on the tray. My fingers trembled slightly as we clicked open the file, a zip folder titled The Brown Plan. Inside, screenshots, bank transactions, travel itineraries, even a scanned page from a notebook. Brandon's handwriting unmistakable. Bullet points, objectives. Step 1, freeze joint account. Step 2, email setup, hannahbrown@mail.com. Step 3, public narrative, mental instability. Step 4, relocate before December, ensure full custody on return. He'd written it like a business strategy, like I was a market to conquer. Vivian leaned back, jaw clenched. He didn't just lie, he drafted a playbook. And Virginia? She wasn't just complicit, her initials were all over the margins. She had written notes in blue pen, make sure she doesn't see Leo on Thanksgiving. I'm gonna destabilize her in court, destabilize me. They'd studied me like a weakness to exploit. I felt the air leave my lungs, not in shock anymore, but in some strange, sad clarity. This was never about Leo. This was about control. About Brandon making sure the version of me he told the world stayed intact. Helpless, vindictive, dependent. Only I wasn't that woman anymore. The next hearing session started with Vivian submitting the digital folder under evidence. Brandon's lawyer tried to fight it, claimed it was stolen material, inadmissible. But Jackie's affidavit, signed and time-stamped, neutralized the claim, and then came the part I didn't see coming. "Your Honor," Vivian said, "we request a temporary freeze on Mr. Brown's international assets and a mandatory psychological evaluation for both parents, as new materials raise concerns about manipulative behavior and endangerment." The judge narrowed her eyes at Brandon. "You'll submit to evaluation this Friday. Non-compliance will be considered contempt." He exploded. "Contempt? You're listening to her? She's been spinning this story since I left. She's playing victim." "No," the judge said firmly, voice like steel. "She's proving hers." Security was called in to de-escalate. Brandon was escorted out, red-faced and raging, shouting something about setting the record straight. But for once, it didn't work. His tantrum only cemented what we had been building for weeks. Back at my apartment that night, Leo was asleep, breathing softly in his room. I sat at the kitchen table, files spread across the surface, the chaos of the day still echoing in my veins. My fingers hovered over my phone, scrolling to the number I hadn't touched in months. Thomas Keller. My father, the man whose name was missing from every chapter of my life, and yet now, strangely, seemed to hold the final piece. I didn't know what I expected when I pressed call, maybe voicemail, maybe silence, but after the second ring, a voice, warm, tired, unmistakably human, answered. "Hello?" I froze, then spoke. "It's me, Hannah." A pause. Then "I was wondering when you'd call." Before I could say another word, he spoke a sentence that made my heart tighten. "You need to know. Your mother lied to both of us." Why would she erase him? That was the question burning a hole through my chest as I stared at the black and white photocopy Vivian had slid across the table. It wasn't a birth certificate, it was my birth certificate, only it wasn't the one I grew up with. This one listed Thomas Keller as my father. No hyphen, no corrections, just a clean typed name under the space labeled father's name. And in that moment, everything inside me tilted. I thought I'd prepared for this. I thought I'd pieced enough of the puzzle to expect it. But seeing it, printed and stamped and notarized from a hospital record in Savannah, Georgia, was like reading a headline about myself written by someone else. Vivian's voice pulled me back. She used the legal loophole. Brandon's mother had the old version sealed when you got married. That's why no one could find it. I whispered, "Why?" Because if this version saw daylight, Virginia's leverage disappeared. My entire identity had been reshaped on paper. We'd tracked the document down through a legal friend of Vivian's at the county clerk's office, disguised as a request for a genealogical search. The envelope had arrived with no return address, just a silent truth bomb waiting to go off. And it had. The silence in the room was thick. "I need to see him," I said finally. Vivian didn't argue. She just nodded. "He said he'd meet you tomorrow morning, public library downtown, conference room B." Of course. Neutral territory. No cameras, no reporters, just facts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying memories that suddenly felt like lies. The time I asked my mother why I had green eyes when Brandon and Virginia both had brown. Her answer, "You get that from Grandma, honey." The way she avoided questions about my early birthdays, why there were never photos from before age 5, the year I caught her shredding a folder with Keller on the tab and she claimed it was junk mail. It wasn't just manipulation, it was curation. She had rewritten my life like a political campaign, scrubbing the inconvenient truths until only her version remained. At 10:04 the next morning, I walked into the library with a folder clutched in my hand and a heart that felt 3 sizes too tight. He was already there. Thomas Keller was not what I expected. No dramatic entrance, no rush of emotion. He stood by the window, hands folded in front of him, eyes a familiar shade of green that mirrored my own. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. We sat. No small talk. Just the kind of silence that belongs to two people who've lived lifetimes without each other. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something that made my breath hitch. An old photo. A woman holding a baby. Me. "You were taken from me, Hannah, not just figuratively. She disappeared." "With you? One day you were mine. The next day I was served a restraining order I never violated. But I never stopped looking." I wanted to ask 1,000 things, but my throat burned. And then he whispered something that changed everything again. "She didn't just change your name. She changed your bloodline. I tried to get a DNA test. She forged documents to block it." I leaned forward, my voice cracking. "Can we fix it?" He slid a small envelope toward me. "Already did. The test results arrived yesterday. They're in there." My hand hovered. Then I opened it. The envelope was thin, just one sheet of paper inside, but it felt heavier than any legal document I'd ever held. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. DNA test results, testing subjects, Hannah Brown, Thomas Keller. Result 99, 99, 99. Present probability of biological relationship, father-daughter. I blinked at the number again. My breath caught in my throat, not because I didn't expect it, but because now it was real, undeniable, scientific. He was my father. Thomas watched me carefully, his voice low and steady. She did everything in her power to erase me from your life. And now you get to decide what to do with the truth. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My mind was racing back through every birthday card that never came, every awkward Father's Day, every time Brandon looked at me with cold indifference. He knew. He must have known. Did you ever see me? I asked. From afar, I mean. His eyes welled up. Once, when you were 6, outside a school in Charleston. I wasn't allowed to approach you, but you were holding a red backpack. That's how I knew it was you. I still remember the way you laughed when you ran toward the swing set. I swallowed hard, trying not to cry. I failed. This wasn't just a hidden truth. It was a stolen life. Later that night, I sat in my apartment with the folder open on the table. Beside it were copies of Virginia's marriage license, sealed court documents from 1993, and a scanned image of an affidavit with my name signed in someone else's handwriting. Vivian walked in quietly and placed a glass of wine beside me. So, what's the plan? I looked at her and whispered, "We burn everything she built." She nodded, like she'd been waiting for me to say that since day one. But we didn't start with fire. We started with a fax. The next morning, Brandon Brown received a sealed manila envelope from his law firm's courier. Inside, a copy of the DNA results, a notarized affidavit from Thomas Keller, and a legal petition to reopen my birth records, complete with media-ready documents Vivian and I had prepared for the press if needed. He called that evening. His voice was hoarse. "What are you trying to do?" "I'm giving you a chance to step aside before this goes public. You'll destroy this family." "You mean your family?" I said coldly. Mine was destroyed before it ever began, and hung up before he could respond. 1 week later, I stood outside Brown and Wells Estate Law in downtown Atlanta. The marble lobby gleamed under soft lighting, and the receptionist didn't even look up when I walked past her. I knew where I was going. Virginia was in the conference room. Alone, like I'd hoped. She looked up, startled, then recovered quickly. "You shouldn't be here." I dropped the birth certificate and DNA report on the glass table. She didn't move. I leaned in close, my voice barely above a whisper. "You forged documents. You lied to the courts. You erased a man's existence. You weaponized the law to manipulate my identity." She still didn't speak. So I leaned back, smiled, and said, "Now, I'm using the law to take it all back." I walked out without another word, my heels echoing off the marble floors like a gavel striking down a guilty verdict. But just as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One new message. "You think Virginia's the only one who lied to you? Ask Thomas why your name was on the Keller Trust 10 years ago." I froze. My blood went cold. "Ask Thomas why your name was on the Keller Trust 10 years ago." That one sentence replayed in my mind like a song I couldn't unhear. Over and over. I stared at the message, long after the screen dimmed, still clutching the phone like it might explode with more truth if I held on tight enough. Trust fund? My name? A decade ago? No one knew I existed. At least, that's what I'd been told all my life. The next morning, I drove straight to the Fulton County Courthouse, skipping coffee, makeup, and even brushing my hair. I needed answers, and I needed them now. In the records division, I requested a search under Hannah Keller and Keller Family Trust. The clerk, a wiry man in his 50s with a deep Southern accent, typed slowly, tapping each key like it owed him money. Then he frowned. "You said your name was Hannah Brown?" "That's right." "Well, that ain't what's here." He turned the screen around. "You're listed here as Hannah Elaine Keller, beneficiary minor. Active file opened May 7, 2015. "That's 10 years ago, ma'am." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Is there a custodian on file? Who set it up?" He nodded and clicked deeper into the record. Thomas Franklin Keller, it says here he established the trust after a sealed paternity case. My throat dried. Couldn't speak. By the time I confronted Thomas, the sun was already setting outside his Charleston townhouse. I didn't knock. I walked in, holding a printed copy of the trust document. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back like he knew I was coming. "You lied to me," I said. "Or at least, you didn't tell me the full truth." "I didn't lie," he said gently. "I protected what I could. But no, I didn't tell you everything. You knew I existed when I was 24. Why didn't you come find me? Why pretend we just met?" He sat down, looking suddenly older. "Because your mother made me sign a non-disclosure. Because Brandon threatened to sue me into $1 billion if I interfered with your life." I scoffed. "So you did nothing?" "I built the trust. I waited. I hoped one day you'd find me and you'd still be whole enough to want the truth." His voice cracked. "But by the time you came back, Hannah, I was afraid. Afraid I'd lose you before I even got to know you." I wanted to scream, to hit something, to disappear. But instead I walked out. Again. Later that week, I stood in front of my old high school, not for nostalgia, but because someone else had asked to meet me there, Virginia. She waited, and on the bleachers like she owned the field, her expensive coat and perfectly smooth blowout so out of place in the fading Georgia sun it made me angry just looking at her. "I'm not here to beg," she said. "I know it's over." I said nothing. "But I need to tell you one last thing. About Thomas." I turned to leave. "He was never supposed to be part of your life," she called after me. "And the trust? That wasn't for you, it was to silence me." I froze. She smiled thinly. "You were a bargaining chip, a consequence of one drunken night and one powerful man who didn't want scandal, so he paid, and paid. And now you're using his money to ruin both of us." She stood and walked away, her heels echoing like gunshots on the metal bleachers. And I was left there, alone, not knowing who I hated more, Brandon, Virginia, or Thomas, or maybe myself, for not seeing it sooner. I spent the night staring at the ceiling of my small apartment, Thomas's words echoing in my head. Virginia's face burned into my memory. Every lie, every silence, every half-truth, they all led to this moment. And for the first time, I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom. But before I could take the next step, there was one last person I needed to face. Not Brandon. Not Virginia. Not even Thomas. Leo. My son. He deserved to know the kind of woman his mother truly was. Not the version whispered about by others, not the villain in his father's stories. The real me. The one who had been torn apart and stitched herself back together with nothing but stubbornness and the will to survive. So, that morning, I dressed him gently, like it was any other day, packed his lunch, kissed his cheek, but this time, I took a different route. We walked to the old park downtown where the bench near the fountain had our names carved faintly on the backrest. Leo plus Mommy 2022. I traced it with my finger. He sat beside me, small hands wrapped around a juice box. "Mommy has to tell you something," I began softly. He looked up with those honest eyes that never judged, never questioned, just trusted. "You know how you asked me once if Daddy was coming back?" He nodded. "He's not, but that's not because of you or me. It's because sometimes people make choices that hurt others, and they try to hide behind lies, but we don't do that. Not you and me." I reached into my purse and handed him a photo, one I'd kept hidden for years. Me, holding him as a baby in the hospital, no makeup, tears on my cheeks, pure joy in my eyes. "This is where we began, just the two of us." He touched the edge of the photo with his tiny fingers. "I like this picture." "I do too," I whispered, "and I think it's time the world sees it." That afternoon, I walked into the offices of the Atlanta Gazette, The USB drive clutched tightly in my hand. Inside, Virginia's emails to Brandon about the fabricated restraining order. Bank transfers from the Keller Family Trust to off-the-books accounts. The signed paternity results and the original custody agreement Brandon never filed in court. I slid it across the desk to the editor, a woman named Andrea I'd met once at a domestic violence fundraiser. "You're about to get the story of the year," I said, "but you're going to need a strong legal team." Andrea leaned forward. "Who are you?" "I'm the woman they thought would stay quiet." The story broke 2 days later. It wasn't just headlines, it was a reckoning. Legal scandal exposes trust fund manipulation, fabricated custody claims, socialite family tied to sealed paternity cover-up. Hannah Brown speaks, they wanted me erased. The media storm was merciless. Brandon's employer issued a statement. Thomas's reputation took a hit. But he released a letter publicly acknowledging me as his daughter. And Virginia? She vanished from public life overnight. But none of that mattered when I stood in front of my son's school the next morning and found an envelope taped to the front gate. No name, no return address, just my name typed cleanly across the front. Inside was a single photo of my mother, Eleanor Brown, younger, smiling, holding a baby, not me. And scrawled on the back, in handwriting I recognized instantly, Thomas's, "You were never supposed to find this. Thanks so much for watching Family and Heart Stories. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more heartfelt dramas every week.